lounging, son.
All right, welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today, I have one of my favorite cartoonists. I have Cliff Chiang here with me. We're going to talk some comics, going to talk some of his projects, and get into what he's currently working on right now. Welcome, dude.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. I think before we hit this record button, like we even mentioned how it's been a while trying to get this going. So I am really stoked to be able to sit here and talk with you today. I always ask everybody first time I have them on, like what started your love for comics? What were some of those early comic books that just kind of did it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I had like a two-stage thing for comics. Like I got into comics as a kid, reading X-Men and Fantastic Four, a lot of Marvel stuff when I was like 10. My brother would bring this stuff home, and then I really got into it. So it's like Paul Smith on X-Men and John Byrne on Fantastic Four, and that's when like Secret Wars was happening. And like when you're that age, it just blows your mind. It just it's so cool. It's such a huge storytelling world to immerse yourself in, and especially the way that stuff is done, it really appeals to you because you're just learning little bits of it at a time from issue to issue, and then you suddenly get this larger picture. So that's how I started reading comics, and then I kind of fell out of it, when I was in high school. That's also when things went to the direct market, so I wasn't able to find the comics that I wanted at the local, like pharmacy, five and dime kind of shop. So I would have to travel to like the mall, and and that was just harder to do, as opposed to like the shop in town. So I kind of fell out of it. And then I got back into comics in college, reading Vertigo stuff, or what would become Vertigo, Hellblazer, Sandman, and then reading indie books like Madman, and that was kind of my second entrance into comics again. And that's what really, reading that stuff, knowing, the Image stuff, Sin City, like knowing all the superhero stuff from before, just seeing the variety of stories that you could tell with a very distinct, voice behind it, was really exciting to me. I had thought maybe that I would be a filmmaker or something like that. And then realizing that there was so much potential within comics to do a very individual kind of storytelling was super exciting, and made me commit myself to it as an art form.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody I talk to, I say this all the time. Comic books are definitely my favorite medium. I love other mediums as well for my entertainment, but like you said, like there's just so much you can do with comics, and I think that even now there's stuff you do in comics you can't get away with on the screen. And you mentioned Madman. I kind of want to ask, because I've always seen a little bit of Mike Allred in your art, but who would you say were the major influences artistically for you?
I think through the years, I've always kind of maintained like a love for like Paul Smith. Just starting off, like him being someone that I followed, early on, him and John Byrne, just like the way they do their storytelling, the way they draw, it's so kind of efficient, and almost becomes, it just pulls you in and is really elegant. And then as I got older and saw more stuff, Alex Toth, David Mazzucchelli, Steve Rude, were also like big influences starting out. And then later, people like Dino Battaglia, an Italian artist, GP, Naoki Urasawa, like they are kind of, for me, more recent touchstones, of people whose work I really enjoy and feel like a weird connection to. I'm not sure exactly why, but just something to do with the pacing and the way that they draw really pulls me in and makes me want to create comics. I think that's when you found somebody whose work you really like, is like you get excited to make your own work as well.
Right on. And I love that you mentioned Naoki Urasawa, because he's somebody that I recently, over the past, I maybe like 3 years ago, I first started reading his stuff, and just like everything I could get from him, just absorbing it. It's amazing. Like I think I discovered your work on the Green Arrow Black Canary. I think that's the first time that I can remember that I saw your name and I associated with the art. Obviously, like I know you have stuff from before that. What was the first kind of like breakthrough that you got into the industry? What was the first
I was doing a lot of kind of short things at first, like one-off issues here and there, which is, exactly how, most artists start out. The first more regular thing that I did was a backup story in Detective Comics called Josie Mack, and that was with Judd Winick. And, that ran for like 10 chapters, and it was like, so 8 pages in the back of, Detective
Mhm.
Comics for a while. And that was really fun. And that from there, did some Vertigo stuff. I worked on Human Target for a few years, trading off with Javier Polito. And then I did a Creeper miniseries. And then, yeah, I think after that was when Green Arrow Black Canary happened,
Mhm.
which was kind of me coming back to superheroes. And,
Mhm.
and that I think that series did put my artwork in front of a lot of people who hadn't seen it before, which was really great. And, I had a lot of fun on that. And that was also with Jeff. And then from there, it was, working with Brian Azzarello, who's a good friend, and, on Doctor 13. And then, let's see, I'm trying to think, like the Spectre for a little, like a Spectre miniseries.
Yeah, that was the Tales from Unexpected, right? I think.
Yeah,
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 that was really good. That was another one of my favorites because Spectre's like such a niche character. Like not a lot of people I don't really hear people say that Spectre's a favorite, but I've always liked those like really obscure, like offbeat characters. That
yeah,
was one of my favorite things you've done. Um yeah, it's funny because I recently was like reading the Grendel omnibus and then I saw your work and I was like because it was like the black and white and red, I think, or red,
yeah,
white, and black, or whatever it was. And I was like, as I would read each story, I was flipping back if I didn't recognize. I'm like, I wouldn't even have known it was you because your art has changed so much from back
right.
then. I mean, I think that was 2002. I think it's
Yeah, that was pretty early on.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
That was definitely, I've had like different phases of just whatever interests me. And I think that's the way to keep it fresh. It's like I don't
yeah,
want to really get locked into one thing. And I'm also, learning new things and then
yeah.
try to incorporate those, into the art. So I think there's something there that is intrinsically me, but there's kind of a surface that changes.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think like once I saw it was you, I'm like, okay. And then I started noticing like
Right.
the bones of it, like when
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
you.
yeah.
It's
I
pretty
love
cool to
seeing
watch.
that with different artists, and
Same.
especially ones who change like really radically. It's just fun to chart their progression.
Yeah, that's like some of my favorite things. I think I've talked to people where they're like, "Oh, I did this and it's something I never heard of," and I'm like, "Oh man, I'd love to see that or something that wasn't published." And they're like, "No," and I'm like, "Why?" Like that's what I love about art. I love watching the progression. I mean, you can
Yeah.
see behind me the paintings. That's like my wife. So like I've watched her and her change, just over the years of just our relationship. And then she shows me stuff from middle school and high school, and
Oh,
I
that's
think that
cool.
it's cool to see
Yeah.
how an artist grows and how they implement new techniques or new styles within. And that was definitely cool to look because I read it like last week before we were going to talk, so it was like it's very fresh in my mind. One of the things, moving a little bit forward, your Wonder Woman
Hmm.
run with Azzarello is probably one of my favorite iterations of the characters. What was that like? Being a part of that, it's somewhat controversial. A lot of people like they either love it, they hate it, or whatever, or they pick and choose what they loved about it. I think Wonder Woman was, in my opinion, top three of favorite things to come out of that. What was that like working on such a storied character and really kind of putting your own stamp, your own designs, changing? I mean, the gods alone were some of my favorite designs. So
Yeah, I think in a way I got really caught up in the idea of doing something new. I didn't know, neither Brian nor I knew that they had the new 52 planned. They just asked us to take on Wonder Woman with this idea that Brian had pitched them.
mm,
And so I was just super excited to get to work and try and mix things up. And then once we learned it was part of the whole New 52 thing, that's actually when it became intimidating because um, we realized that there were going to be a lot more eyeballs on this than we thought, and that it kind of changed a little bit of the tenor of what we were proposing. But it was really fun. I think kind of just mixing it up like that to me is interesting on an idea level, like how, like what the question is, like who is Wonder Woman? What does she represent? How far can you push that to the point where she's unrecognizable or the concept breaks, And so I understand when people, have their problems with the run or the ideas behind the run, but we tried to do something that hopefully was welcoming to new readers, and that would provide something different from what had come before.
Yeah, I definitely think that it was evident in your run, like where me as a long time, because I mean, you talk about Marvel being kind of your touchstone as a kid. DC was mine. So
Hmm.
like I didn't find it as egregious that they tried something different, DC. I mean, some of it I was upset with, certain characters were no longer a part of the DC universe, like the main proper universe. But it wasn't like I'm abandoning DC now because they did it. And I did think that's why I said Wonder Woman was one of my favorites, is because old readers like myself that loved what came before, I loved, it had something for me, but it also just felt so fresh and so different that it was more of a risk, like I felt like, and I
Yeah.
liked some of that risk. I liked seeing
Yeah.
them switch it up, and like do something fresh and kind of bringing in new readers. And that's why for the most part, like I if I had to like weigh it out and went title by title, I think I liked more than I didn't like.
Hmm.
I talked to India recently, and I was like, you know what? I realized that there was some stuff I didn't care for, but there was a lot that I think really hit. And I think it was evident in the sales in the beginning. I think a lot of the books did very well. And yeah, I adore that Wonder Woman run that you guys did.
Thanks.
And I wanted to ask, if you work with collaborators, Judd Winnick multiple times, Azzarello multiple times. What is the, and obviously Brian K. Vaughan, we'll talk about that in a second, but what is the working relationship usually with the writers, especially if you've worked with them more than once? Is it really coming up with the ideas collaboratively? Do they give you kind of the room to implement your own thing, or is it very like strict in terms of like the scripting and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's usually pretty easygoing. I think once it's really the first job, with a new writer, that you haven't worked with before, where you're trying to negotiate a little bit of how, how it works, and how much communication you're going to have with them. I'm friendly with Judd, but we didn't really talk that much about the work. He would send the scripts in, and it was all very clear, and I didn't necessarily have a lot of questions for him either. With Brian, because with Azzarello, because we're friends, it made it easy to talk to him about anything that was coming up or whatever. And as the run went on with Wonder Woman, we started working Marvel style, like pop plot script. So
Nice.
that really, I felt much more involved there with a lot of the storytelling, because I would get, kind of a description of the issue and then kind of plot it out and be able to, kind of map out like the action, the visual action of what was going on. And then and so things would be going back and forth between us more, and ultimately, yeah, that's going to feel more collaborative. But I think comics writers who allow for collaboration, who understand that artists are going to bring something different to the table than what they might have imagined, like those are the ones who do better, who do well, because of the fact that you have to collaborate means you have to let everybody bring their voice to it.
Right. Let's go to your work with Brian K. Vaughan.
Hmm.
Paper Girls, probably my second, be tied for my first and second favorite of his work. I love Paper Girls. I work at a shop myself, and it's like one of the things I'm constantly recommending to people. Can you talk a little bit about how that project with Brian came about?
Yeah, Brian and I had been like really wanting to work together. We had worked on one issue of Swamp Thing from very early in both of our careers, and then after that, I had a great time working on that story. He enjoyed it, and after that, we tried to work together, but our schedules never matched up. I'd be on something, or he'd be on something with a regular artist, and so it just never happened. And it took like 15 years before we finally both were at the same spot where we didn't have anything. We didn't have another book that we had to do. So I had been emailing him with him as Wonder Woman was wrapping up, and he had some ideas. He sent me Paper Girls, and I just immediately knew like I had to do it. It scared me a little bit. I didn't know. I can't ride a bike myself. I don't know if I can draw bicycles. I don't know if I can draw kids really. It's so rare that you actually have to draw. And in superhero comics, that you have to draw anything other than like a dude in skin tight, costumes. So the idea of drawing 4 12-year-old girls like consistently for 30 issues was kind of scary. But I knew that if I didn't draw it, that I would regret it, because so much of that pitch spoke to me and how I grew up, and felt very personal. So yeah, it was a really great project. I had so much fun working on that, and doing it at Image as a creator-owned book was really important too. It really was our vision, um, you know, unfiltered and exactly the way we wanted it to be. So having that kind of creative control over something was really inspiring, and really, I think, unlocked something in me that as a creator, to see the potential of what you can do in a comic and how much of yourself you can push into a story, and have that connect with other people. I think because of those qualities, because of the specific nature of what you do and how you present it, that connects with readers, and it makes them recognize that there's a person behind this story. I think it's very easy with um, work for hire, I think, to just feel like you're a cog in the machine and just deliver, kind of the basics of a script, the bare bones, but then the more of yourself that you put into it, the better it is.
Yeah, it's hard because like I love superhero comics, but like you said, like you can. I mean, for me, I feel the difference in a
Yeah.
creator owned project because obviously it's like it's more like writing Batman or whatever, Wonder Woman, whatever comic you're writing. It's not your baby, you know.
Yeah.
A creator owned book is really of yourself, and like you, I feel like you're going to put more into it because it's something that is really a part of you as opposed to just like you said, a part of the cog, right?
Yeah. Part of it is, it's when you're working on somebody else's creation, it's kind of a commission, like there are certain rules around it that even, that you're just aware of. But then when you're doing your own thing, you don't have to check in with anybody. And there's a kind of velocity to that creatively that you can just keep going. And then the faster you go, the more ideas come to you. And so the experience of working on that feels very different. It feels unfettered. Even if I've always had really good experiences with DC, and especially with Wonder Woman, they let us do tons of stuff, and we didn't really hit um, many obstacles. But working on Paper Girls just felt like suddenly, you could just run free, through the
Yeah.
fields, and there's something so liberating about that, and really fulfilling.
Yeah, that's the thing is you never know what you can get. You know that you're gonna hit a ceiling with Marvel and DC, and the superhero stuff because, like you said, there's only so much they'll let you do. Like there's only so far you can take their characters. I know you won an Eisner for Paper Girls, which is super awesome, dude. Like I well deserved. I mean, honestly, it was one of my favorite books the entire time it was coming out.
Thank you.
I wish it would have gone longer, but I get why it ended where it ended. Like it was
Yeah.
like a really great story. Then it's been adapted, which I'm kind of curious. How did you feel to see your work adapted on the small screen for the first time?
It was pretty mind blowing. We really said all that we wanted to say with the comics, and it was so flattering that people wanted to adapt it, and the way that they did it was so respectful of what we did and the story that we wanted to tell. They really kept the heart of it, but then they were able to put their own spin on it. It's really and make something different from the comic, but that still felt like it was coming from the same place too. So I feel like one-to-one adaptations can be kind of boring, and this was something that they could put their spin on and make something that honestly, I feel like we haven't seen much of in TV. TV for and starring young women, and that's, I feel like part of the reception of the Paper Girls show was, just people so surprised and feeling seen by the series. So it's really an honor to have been a part of that. That all the hard work was them, was the writers and the showrunners. But it's really, I'm so grateful to have been a part of that, and to be able to have our story kind of come out in this different way for a completely different audience that might never read the comic or can go back and read the comic now. So I think that's super cool.
And how involved do they like were you and Brian with the show? Did they consult you guys at all? Like how?
Yeah, we made ourselves available to them, and early on we wrote things, and I gave them visual reference and explanations for why I drew things the way I did, to just give them background,
Right.
like everything is intentional, so this is why we did this X, Y, or Z, and then they could use that, in their version, I remember reading somewhere, maybe it was on Twitter or something like that, that somebody had come up with the idea that the show is kind of like what happens to them after the comic,
Uh-huh.
as so it's like a different version of it, like so because it keeps repeating in that weird way where how much do they remember of each other, and so it's like a and I like that. I like the idea of it kind of this multiverse of Paper Girls.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an awesome idea. I didn't look at it that way. That's pretty cool. I'm kind of curious. You have to have heard the comparison like to Stranger Things,
Hmm.
right? I always tell people in the shop that it was Stranger Things before Stranger Things,
Right.
because it had a lot of the same feels. Um, but obviously it's a completely different type of story. I get it, but I just always thought that it was kind of crazy because like I've never read interviews with the creators of Stranger Things, but I like to think they had to have read Paper Girls and pulled a little bit of influence from
I,
that.
yeah, I think it's probably parallel, development, given how long it takes for TV to get made as well. But I think there's a definite like love and acknowledgement of our nostalgia for the '80s, that's at play in both, but very different story goals, I think, and genres ultimately. I think Stranger Things is such a great love letter to '80s horror films,
Mhm.
whereas Paper Girls, I think, is more about like sci-fi coming of age,
Yeah.
and which we've seen so much, but not never from a female point of view, and how that changes the story and how it makes it more about their relationships to each other, I think is really fascinating.
Do you listen to music when you illustrate? And if so, what were you listening to when you were doing Paper Girls?
I mean, it's changed over the years. It used to be I would listen to music a lot. I remember, the early days, pre MP3, like your first splurge purchase would be a CD changer, so
Yeah.
that so that I wouldn't have to keep getting up to change the CDs every 45 minutes,
Yep.
and that was such a thing to like make sure, like, what am I going to do? Am I just going to listen to one, artist, for the next 5 albums, or am I going to mix it up and, or what? Um, and so music was definitely a bigger part of like what I would listen to. And then lately, it's kind of just anything that would just keep my ass in the chair, working. So like either streaming, stuff, podcasts, music. Lately, it's been like YouTube, like ridiculous stuff on YouTube, like not nothing even like story wise. Yeah, it kind of depends on what my mood is and stuff like that. When I'm writing, I actually don't listen to anything. I keep it completely quiet. I just um, part of that is me just not being confident enough to let all that other stuff in, and I really need to focus. But it's changed. But I'll watch things that aren't necessarily visual, or I like watching things where I only need to look up every now and then, and
Mhm.
I don't need to follow the story that closely, or I've seen it before, like second or third rewatch of The Sopranos or something like that. Um, or some sort of like, home renovation show or something, like those are oddly like really satisfying when you're working because you just get from beginning to end with it and then that's it. And you don't have to like, it doesn't stay with you and you're just on to the next one. Um,
Yeah, I get it.
yeah, there's like a process thing about it, but then there are like some really, great shows. You're like, oh no, I actually need to spend some time with this and focus on it. And so I have to watch those when I'm not working. And when I'm on deadline, often that means, I'm working all the time. So I have to push off, you know, um, keeping up with stuff.
So let's you're talking about writing and drawing. Let's talk about Catwoman Lonely City. One of the best things to come out this past year from BC, hands down. You did everything
Yeah, thank you.
on that book. And everything was flawless. I mean, I can't praise that book enough. Um I'd love to hear, how that project for you came about. Did you reach out to DC? Did they reach out to you? It is a part of the Black Label book for everybody listening and watching, if you don't know that. So it's in its own continuity. Um, but it's a beautiful book, beautiful book.
Thank you. It, I remember being when the DC Black Label was announced, and I was so excited by it. The idea of being able to take their characters and put them into books that were meant to be evergreen and towards a mass market audience, towards an older audience, just kind of opened up a lot of storytelling possibilities. You didn't have to worry about continuity as much. It's kind of meant to be its own thing, and you can pick up the book without having read another Batman book or Catwoman book. And that's my hope is like, Lonely City, all you need is the basic pop culture knowledge of who these characters might be, and then it just plays with that. So I was super excited by Black Label, and then when the editors approached me about doing something for it, I was, just super flattered and hadn't considered writing it until they suggested it, and it's something that I've always wanted to do, but didn't have the confidence to go for it. I always figured, oh, I'm gonna have to write something small and then and then build my way up, like as if there's some sort of ladder or something, um, and also maybe just for my own comfort, just to write a few shorter things and then do something longer. But when Mark Doyle and Chris Conroy came to me and said, why don't you, we want to see what your take on like New Frontier would be, what's your work that you can really kind of pour yourself into and give us your vision of DC. I thought about it for a long time. It took me like 6 months to kind of just go through it in my head. Did I have like a big epic New Frontier story like Darwin Cook had, and I didn't. I was like, as much as I like, love these old DC comics, I don't love all of it. I don't have the kind of same fandom of it that I think that it would need to do this kind of giant spanning all the corners of the DCU kind of thing. I like character stories. I like things that are kind of more focused. And I realized that I shouldn't do that. I should try and just focus on one character maybe, and that led me to Catwoman. I've always liked Catwoman. Darwin's work on Catwoman is just unparalleled, and she's such in many ways, kind of a blank slate. Like, the only thing that you need to know about her is that she's a woman. She dresses up like as a cat, and she's a cat burglar. Like, it's all there. It's there in her name, and that's it. And beyond that, you can kind of, put what you need into her. She's like a perfect noir, hero. She could be, like in any one of these kind of, noir detective stories, with a little twist. And Darwin showed that in Selena's Big Score. For me, a Catwoman heist story, is a great way for people to, people like heist movies, and they kind of have an expectation of how they go. There's a structure to it, which was helpful to me. And then, what would be, what can be better than doing that? I love when the genres mix, the superhero plus something else. So a superhero war story or a superhero, heist movie. And it seemed really cool, but I also knew that it needed another layer to it. Like, why are you telling the story? And when I thought about Darwin and Ed Brubaker's Catwoman having come out in like the year 2000 or around there. It meant that like it had been like almost 20 years since Catwoman had been rebooted and reinvigorated like that, and that's a significant amount of time. And it just made me think, like, what would that character be now? Where would they be if time were allowed to progress? And that's how, and showing Selena as an older woman suddenly put a different lens on the whole story and the whole DCU, and that was incredibly exciting to me. That's when the whole project unlocked, and I felt like I could talk about things beyond just the plot.
Yeah, and I love that Batman is not he's not even really a factor. I mean, he's
Yeah,
there in the background, but he's not really. I mean, he's not around. I don't want to,
yeah.
just in case anybody hasn't read it. I don't want to I don't want
Well,
to spoil it for
no, I
anybody.
think that's
But
part of like the premise. The
yeah,
idea is that Batman is dead. It's been 10 years since he died, and Selena Kyle gets out of prison, having gone away for being blamed for his death, and when she comes back, the city's completely different. And that was a big thing for me, is like, what does Gotham look like without Batman? That's an interesting idea because he has shaped so much of it,
right.
and it's not even like without Batman, without the Joker and without Commissioner Gordon, so like they really controlled the fate of Gotham for so many years, and with them gone, how does the city recreate itself? And being a New Yorker, it's I always saw Gotham as being like a kind of like a funhouse version of New York,
Yeah,
and now this was a chance to kind of pull Gotham into being more like New York, and the more in the way that modern cities have a dark underbelly, but you might not see it on the surface. As more money pours into the city and development happens and more gentrification happens, like the city gets cleaner, but is it better? And is it more fair to live in? And those were a lot of issues that I saw, living in Brooklyn, and just being, wanting more equity, equality for people, and trying to inject that bit of realism into Gotham was cool, and that's what I think makes it appeal to an older audience. Like, these are things that I think are interesting. This is not something that me as a 10-year-old you know um, that I would have necessarily wanted to read, but like these are the issues that get brought up when you try to kind of modernize the superhero stories.
yeah, and I love that you mentioned Darwin and uh, Darwin Cook and Ed Brubaker's Catwoman run, which to me is the high mark of the character. Like, there's very rarely does something like come close to it, and I think that that's why like it. And then Catwoman has had her changes throughout the years. I mean, a lot of the Tom King stuff where Batman is in a relationship with Catwoman, which I'm not opposed to, but I like her at best when she's kind of by herself in her own
Right.
little world. And I think that that's why I fell in love with Lonely City, like from the first issue, because I picked it up. And first of all, I picked it up because I love your work. But then I'm like, Catwoman 2, it's like, I can't wait to see where this goes. And it was such a
Yeah.
different Gotham,
Right.
seeing so many of these characters, seeing Two-Face in the role that he was in, seeing Killer Croc, Poison Ivy, all of these characters in a way I'd never seen before. And throughout the entire series, it was just it. I hope that it becomes one of those evergreen stories. I feel like it's there. All that you need to have an evergreen story is within that book. And I'm excited to get the hardcover when it comes out. It's coming out, actually, I think it's out today as of the day we're talking. So I do want to know though, like, separating like all the different things, like the writing, the coloring, the drawing, the lettering, everything that you've done on that book. What's How do you divide up that workload, and how long did one issue take you?
Yeah, that's actually hard to answer because I split it up into different stages,
Okay.
different parts of the craft. I wrote the whole thing out at once.
Uh-huh.
Like I had an outline, and we had notes, and then went back to it, and then I wrote the script. Um, or wrote an outline for it, and then I wrote the first script. After I was done with the first script, I actually went back and then did layouts and lettering for it so that we could read it as a comic book and say, like, is this working? Like, or is this completely off the rails, you know?
Mhm.
And after doing that, being able to read it and feeling good about it, that's when I started writing the second issue, you know, and then the third and the fourth after that, doing you know, some layouts and lettering in between. So by the time I was done with the writing, a few months after that, we had the whole book in very rough form to read and say, you know, this works, this doesn't work, maybe this page needs to change, this feels off. So there's a constant process of being able to edit and hone the story uh, from a very basic level, you know, as opposed to saying, okay, it's written, now I can't change a word of it. I'm just going to draw it now, you know, like it was always like, how do I make this better? How do I change things? How do I, and always trying to assess the comic as a whole story, you know? So even like after the first issue was done, like I think I went back and rewrote like parts, refocused parts of, you know, issues to better get at some of the themes, you know, because you don't know what lands until it's drawn in a lot of
Right.
ways. You might think it sounds one way in the script, but then when you see it on the page, maybe it's lacking some impact. And maybe that's because you didn't set it up right in the scene before, you know? So finding those places to tweak it, you know, was really great because if you haven't like colored, you know, like done finished art on something, it's really easy, right? Like you can just, you know, just do a new sketch of a panel, you know, and that doesn't incur like a cost, like in terms of time and effort, you know, and allows you to be more free and take on, make bigger changes if you need to. So once it was written, then I did issue by issue in like 12 page, 11 page chunks, you know, penciling, inking, and coloring 10 or 11 pages, and then going on to the next one, you know, and that took a while. I mean, the whole thing took me easily twice as long as I thought it was going to. I was probably on it for about 3 years, and I thought it was going to take a year and a half. Part of
Wow.
that is like the pages are bigger. Like the Black Label is Black Label books are magazine size, so pretty much 8.5 by 11, which is maybe 30% larger than a regular comic page. And having that extra space is great because for me, I just put more panels onto it. I could tell more story using the same number of pages, you know. But the more panels you have on a page, it kind of becomes a lot more difficult, you know. It's like so it was easily, yeah, twice as much work and for everything, you know. And I wasn't quite prepared for that, and that's what, you know, what's why it took so long. And also I love the idea of, you know, one of the inspirations, of course, is, you know, Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns, and those books from the 80s that, you know, that, and, you know, and Year One, you know, where you, for Dark Knight, you know, getting this prestige format, you know, of 48 pages, you know, in a square bound book, you know, like that really felt special at the time. And that's part of what I wanted to bring to Lonely City, to make it feel like something different from a monthly comic. And that meant a lot of attention to story detail, you know. Everything is very intentional in the book. Every panel, every color, like every little Easter egg reference or whatever, is there for a reason. And you know, that's a hard way to work. To me, it makes it a different kind of comic than, you know, your regular 20-page monthly comic, where that's more punk rock and like you're getting it out there as quick as you can, and you're almost having a conversation with the audience, you know, on a month by month basis. And this is like a more kind of considered, I hesitate to say refined experience, but like it's a prestige book. You want it to feel like something special. You want to feel like the author really put a lot of thought into it, you know. And
Mhm.
that's, so, you know, that was the extra thing where I felt like I didn't want to compromise on anything. I didn't want to just like do something because it needed to come out, you know.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, I think that, and it shows in the quality of the work, you know. I hate I hate when stuff feels like it's rushed, or I
Right.
hate like in, you know, let's say even like a, for example, like a 12 issue maxi series that's supposed to come out on a monthly basis. I'd rather wait
Yeah.
between issues
Yeah.
than get some fill-in artist that just, it's not the same, it's not the vision that was intended,
Yeah.
by the creators. And I think that especially for someone like yourself, like you did every single aspect of this book, like it's a singular vision. So of course, like, I'll wait. I don't mind waiting. I think I was reading, or I heard somewhere recently, like Dark Knight Returns, there was a long gap between issues when those were coming out. So, and it didn't take away from people's love of the book. It didn't take away from people praising it after the fact. Like, nobody looks at it all these years later like, oh, it was late. No, they look at the they look at the finished product and they're like, this is
Right.
a great book.
Yeah.
So this was your first time writing? Was this also your first time coloring as well?
I mean, I'd written short things before. I did a Batman black and white story, and that was just 8 pages. So that kind of got my feet wet with it. And I used to work in editorial at DC, so a lot of my training kind of is to look at story in a certain way, um, and be familiar with all the different parts of the comic. And I've colored my own. I always color my own covers, and I've done some short things that I've colored myself as well. And I always have a lot of input and conversations with like Matt Wilson on Paper Girls and
Yeah.
Wonder Woman, and this is my first time lettering anything really. And it was all, it's a blast. I mean, I love having really specific, nuanced control over the story, so
Yeah.
just the color, it's like, there, just there are a lot of things that you feel and like you just want a certain kind of tone to come through, it's a vibe, more than
Yeah.
anything. And being able to control that was great. And then even balloons, just like the placement, nudging it a bit here and there feels different. And it feels like a small thing, but these are all, really just nice things to have. Like, you can get a totally professional readable comic without this kind of minute level of detail, but and that's okay, but in this case, let's make this like a real labor of love, and try and do something that is so considered, and to me feels a little bit more like, I don't know, for me, when people read a book, sometimes they'll come up and ask you, oh, did you mean this, when this happens or whatever, and sometimes you know they come up with something completely new, and I think that's really cool, and that
Mhm.
happens a lot, I think, with monthly comics, because you're kind of playing fast and loose with a lot of things, and you need to move on and get to the next issue, and you don't get to consider all the implications of something. But with this, it's like the reader is always going to be expecting that you intended something, and
Yeah.
so let's reward that. Let's say, yes, that's exactly what I meant. Yes, that color is why, you do know why that's there or whatever, so um and that was the fun thing about it. I don't usually get to make comics in that way, and so having such a really fine level of control over the whole storytelling process was great.
Have you got your comps for the hardcover?
Yeah, I got them a few weeks ago, and it's just crazy to have like 3 years of your life,
Yeah.
especially the past 3 years that have been so
Yeah.
nuts,
Yeah.
kind of encapsulated in this one volume, and a lot has happened, there's a way in which, the story is a lot about grief, about Selena Kyle's grief, and I think it's an appropriate story for our time too. I think we're still figuring out like what we've lost over the past few years,
Mhm.
experiences and people, and how the world has changed, um, when we, like underneath our feet, and that's very much what Selena is feeling as she comes back to Gotham. And so I think there's a lot there that uh, speaks to what we're all going through.
I didn't even realize as we had been talking that this all took place like during COVID and what we've been going through in the world. Like, did the story change or did that influence any changes in the story from how you originally perceived it into what we
Yeah,
got at the end?
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of what's happened has kind of gave it a little tighter focus. The I wanted to tackle a little bit more of like racial inequality in Gotham,
Hmm.
and I was kind of softballing it in the initial draft, but certainly as we got through, as COVID happened, and then Black Lives Matter, all the protests were happening, like those things figured into the story more. Like I already had protesters, but then I realized like it needed to be a little bit more or speak to the moment a little bit
Right.
more than it did. Um, and I was grateful for that. And, I didn't want to draw. I think it's a little disrespectful to draw one-to-one parallels in this fictional world um, with too much of what was going on. Like I think, a worst case scenario would have been like, someone holding like a Bad Lives Matter sign or something like ridiculous like that, cheesy,
Right.
and corny and not really engaging with the issues. And in this case, Gotham is not New York, but it's very much like New York, and it has a lot of the same problems. And and that revolves around money and power and race, and so I wanted to show Gotham having real city problems, and as opposed to just being this kind of fictional place that just exists as a gothic backdrop for Batman.
Yeah, I
I
think
want to
that.
show it as a city with real people.
Yeah, I love that. Like it. I think I love the story even more now. I didn't even like think about the fact that of what would like, because sometimes when I'm reading the comic, like I tend, or any comic, I'm not always using it as an escape, but it is,
Yeah,
reading entertainment is an escape. So like I try to like not really think about those things. I think maybe in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, that's interesting that it's like, oh, that's kind of what's going on. But I think that you did it in a way that where it didn't really make me feel like you were
yeah.
really trying to comment on what was going on in the world, because I was so immersed in what I was looking at and reading at the time.
Yeah, there are ways in which I think it's a very political book, but it's not using the politics in the same way that that in a more bombastic way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think I think it's also tricky. I think it's hard when you're using characters like Catwoman and Batman and stuff like that. It's like how much can superheroes be used as a vehicle for some of these ideas. I don't think it's necessarily the best place for it. It's it doesn't give you the breadth that you need to discuss these issues properly. But I think you can touch on them. I think you can make it. It adds to the story. It adds to the weight of it, and um, maybe for me that's all I'm comfortable doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly others who might disagree and feel like you can put more into it, and that's certainly valid. It's just not necessarily what I wanted. I guess to make a comic that I felt I wanted to read.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's when it comes to Batman and Catwoman stuff. I like it when it touches on the real world, but there's a limit. There's a limit to believability and entertainment as well.
I totally agree. It's not the same like it was back when Captain America was like punching Hitler on the cover of a comic. It's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
We're not doing the same stuff now, and I agree.
I don't
Like
know. We
there's
might need it though.
maybe we do. Yeah. Um. So I want to talk about you kind of been talking about like the experience of working on like Paper Girls. How much freedom and ultimate control did you have with this particular story? Was there any type of don't go too far? I mean, I know you said you didn't want to take it like kind of too far already, just for your own personal aesthetic. But what kind of freedom what did they give you in terms of what you
Yeah,
wanted to do?
Black Label is built on creators' visions.
Okay.
Like it's specifically about a creator's take on the character, and as such, they give a lot of freedom. It's probably been one of the best editorial experiences I've had, just in terms of, like they just support you every step of the way. If you want to, there might be things that maybe they would rather you not do. And those things did come up, but and I was fine with those changes, because they just come with the territory. It's, again, it's
Mhm.
not a creator owned thing. You can't just, these are their toys. But by and large, like, you're allowed to do just about anything. And with Lonely City, they knew, I gave them an outline, I gave them a pitch that was very much very close to what came out. And so they knew what it was targeting, what the issues were targeting, and what the tone was going to be. So um, and we didn't really, stray from that too far. So they were really great about it. And it was always like, well, what do you need? We're here for you. We're here to support you. This is cool. We had some early discussions around some things that might have been problematic, and I totally saw where they were coming from. So, but after that, it was completely very smooth sailing, and I appreciated. Um, really appreciated all the story input that the editors gave me. In particular, Chris Conroy, after Mark Doyle left, Chris took over, and I've worked with Chris for a long time now. He was on Wonder Woman as well, and as well as some other shorter things that I'd done before that. And he's got such a great eye for. He reads everything. He's been a long time superhero comics reader, but he also loves all the Vertigo stuff and loves indie comics, but where my blind spots are around kind of the monthly superhero stuff, and some of the tropes, maybe, or you know like what a reader might want or expect to happen, and having his eye on that and being able to give input in that way was really helpful.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to hear that they kind of let you just roll with what you wanted to do, because like I think it's a question I don't really ask much when I talk to creators, like how much pushback do you get, or how much did the editorial try to kind of like assert some sort of control over the project. So that's really cool to hear. I was kind of another, question I had about it was, is this a kind of like a world that you'd want to revisit? Have you thought about revisiting it? Kind of like what Sean Murphy did with his White Knight one.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. There are a lot more stories I could tell. I don't know if they would center on Selena,
Yeah,
but the whole cast of Gotham, there's so much you could do. There are questions like, what's Metropolis like, in this world too, and those are things that I've thought about, and I would love to get the chance to do them. Let's see if there's any, uh, let's see if there's desire for it,
yeah.
either from the readers or from DC. Now that the book is out, we'll have a much better idea of, how this story connects with people.
Right on. And what are you currently working on right now?
I'm just doing some short things, covers. Working on Lonely City definitely took a lot out of me this past year, and trying to find, rather than jump into the next thing like right away, I wanted to take a little bit of time just to figure out like what's exciting, like what's a cool idea that maybe you wouldn't think of if you're just trying to, when you're on that deadline treadmill,
Yeah.
you default to things that you've done before, and I wanted to take a little time to just consider, well, what's something I haven't done, what's exciting, what's challenging, and what makes sense as, a next thing. Do I want to do something longer? Do I want to do something shorter? Do I want to write it myself, or do I want to collaborate with somebody again? So slowly figuring that out, but until I do have that project, I'll just be doing, some covers and things like that, and just trying to keep my, my hands, my brush, from drying out, so to
Yeah.
speak.
So what's a typical day for you? Like when you're not currently on a project, are you always constantly creating art? Do you like, is it not the same as when you have the deadline?
Yeah, I'm not like one of those guys who has um like a sketchbook that I'm constantly working on and stuff like that. Like I tend to, just work when I have a job. I'm only drawing when it's work. Partly because that's just who I am. Like I want to tell stories, and it's harder to tell a story through one image. So I'm usually just not sketching,
Yeah.
and I know that would be better for me as for my development as an artist, but I tend to just draw really when I have a deadline and when I have something that I'm supposed to be turning in. Uh, so, a lot of it has been also to see what just to take a breather from drawing so regularly, and then so that I can also, read some books and look at art that I've liked and think about directions that I haven't pushed my art in. And that will involve some more experimentation later. But I think this free time coming up as it has at the end of the year means like a lot of it's been focused on like the holidays and doing family stuff and we'll see. I think next year is exciting. And once January hits, I'll have some work that I need to do and I'll be looking at stuff and hopefully getting, kind of a new perspective on my work.
Awesome, man. Well, I want to thank you for sitting here and talking some comics with me, dude. I had a blast.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to ask one thing. Anything that you've been reading or that you've been checking out lately, that you kind of been digging and you can share with us.
I guess two things. One is a book from last year that I think is just fantastic, called No One Else by R. Kiko Johnson.
Hmm.
It came out for Fantagraphics, and it's just a fantastic book. It's just so um, it's fiction and just so perfectly tuned. It's really exciting to see somebody so in control of their craft. And it reminds me of the second thing. It reminds me of the Hernandez brothers, who have
Yes.
like a new collection out, this box set collection that's just like I have all the hardcovers, so like I can't like bring myself to buy it, but it's so beautiful. This hardcover, this box set of the single issues, that's so well designed, and those guys are such an inspiration to me. Where just doing independent comics about your own stories, your own characters from your perspective as a person of color. I think it's just fantastic, and the guys have been doing it for so long and so consistently, and it's really just so great to see them be recognized now with this collection and have people talk about them. So
Yeah, it's a hefty price tag on that collection. I ordered myself one. It's at my shop. I just
yeah,
haven't. I'm gonna have to like make payments on it. That thing's huge. Um,
layaway, right?
yeah, yeah. That's cool to hear you say that though, because I mean, who doesn't love the Hernandez brothers? If you're not reading Love and Rockets or haven't, I highly suggest you change that now. So one thing also, I guess one last thing is for everybody listening and watching, can you share where the best place to follow you and check out your work and keep up to date on everything you're doing would be?
Yeah, I don't know. Social media seems pretty choppy waters these days, but you can always
Yeah.
find me at cliffchang.com. It has my social media links on there, but I'm just usually Cliff Chang on any of them, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr, and what have you. So whatever pops up in the meantime, look for me there. I don't post that often to social media. I try to, you know, I like reading other people's thoughts on stuff, and then for me, anything that I'm putting out there is usually in my work.
Right on. Well,
but yeah, that's the best place to find me.
cool. And I'll drop the links down below for everybody listening and watching. And Cliff, once again, dude, thank you so much. I had such a blast talking with you, and I would love to do this with you again sometime down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.